Bom dia to the Brazilian audience joining us in, and a very good evening to the Indian audience. I'm Nidhi. I work at the Science, Technology, and Innovation section at the Brazilian Embassy in New Delhi. And I welcome you all to the fourth edition of India Brazil Fintech webinar series, which is being jointly organized by the Embassy, Startup India, and Invest India. I'll be co moderating this session, which is themed on Agrifintechs, startups using technology to provide critical services in agriculture. Uh, I'll be co-moderating this session along with Mr. Agrim Agarwal.
Welcome to our session on Agrifintech startups. Today we'll discuss about how digital capital availability can improve the efficiency and productivity of agricultural supply chains in India and Brazil. I'm Agrim Agarwal. I'm a fintech investment specialist at Invest India, the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency of India. Interestingly, agriculture accounts for nearly 23% of Brazil's GDP and 16% or so of India's. A major driver of this has been agri-financing, becoming fundamental to support the farmers in meeting the demand side of these GDP percentages as well. To talk more about this, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our two speakers, Secretary Roberta Lima and Ms. Astha Grover. Ms. Roberta presently serves as the Head of Science, Technology and Innovation section at the Brazilian Embassy, New Delhi, India. Ms. Roberta, please.
Hello, dear colleagues from Invest India, Startup India, fellow panelists and public. Bom dia, good morning to Brazil and good evening to India. Agriculture is one sector that has shown resilience in face of the global pandemic. In Brazil, as in India, it has not only managed to keep growth pace, but it's poised to reach all-time highs in the coming years. However, as the pandemic has affected the cash flows in the overall economy, agriculture financing has become more than ever the crucial backbone for sustaining this projected growth. Public policies in Brazil, as in India, are devised to cover agribusiness financing, but universal financial inclusion is still a common challenge for our both countries. As we know, for the small and medium scale producers, it's very hard to get bank financing. So they become sometimes dependent on more informal channels that charge more high interest rates and premiums for avail credit and crop insurance. As this is where the Agrifintech startups may come on board and be a game changer with faster, lower cost, and less bureaucratic model of financing. Agri-fintech startups in Brazil, as in India, have precisely identified the shortcomings in the traditional rural financial system and are tackling them through innovative solutions like real-time credit and risk assessment and predictive analysis reports. By eliminating the role of the intermediaries and the middlemen, these fintechs ensure that availability of capital to farmers are lower at lower interest rates and are more transparent and faster process. Also, by creating positive externalities through the provision of affordable financing to agricultural producers, these startups are stimulating infrastructure investments to farmer collectives, giving them further impetus to grow. In the case of Brazil, as major player in agriculture, financing for the sector is pivotal and the sources have to be multiple. Bank capital won't alone solve the problem of financing Brazilian agribusiness, a sector that accounts for 1/4 of the country's GDP and keeps growing at a fast pace. Fortunately for us, this scenario for capital markets and agri-fintechs is promising, as investors tend to seek more structured access after fall in interest rates. Besides, as startups tend to focus on financing the small and medium scale producers, their business matches perfectly with farmers' needs to access credit and insurance. Brazil has now over 500 fintechs, many of them already offering tailor-made services for our agriculture sector. India also has a prosperous market for technology startups. By opening a two-way avenue for this expertise and action, we may not only foster very needed financing and investment solutions for the essential sector for both India and Brazil, but also strengthen our fintech companies to venture globally. As Brazilian and Indians, we all know that one of our qualities is to think outside the box. So when we overcome our challenges, so this is the right time to renovate the way we finance and invest in agriculture. And I'm sure the panelists here are the best person to show the way ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bertha, for your valuable insights on the trends being observed globally and particularly in the Brazilian agri-fintech ecosystem. To share the Indian perspective on the same, I would now request Ms. Astha Grover, Head of Startup India at Invest India, to share her views. Ms. Astha,
Thank you, Nidhi and Agri. Your Excellency, Roberta, and to all the esteemed panelists that are there with us today. A good morning to all our friends in Brazil and a good evening to everyone in India. I'm delighted for this opportunity to the foundation of the very exciting discussion that is about to follow. The agri-tech sector in India has witnessed a surge of startup activity over the past 7 years. And, if I may add, so the beauty of startups and innovation in the Indian context is often observed in the unique multi-sectoral problems that our entrepreneurs have tried to solve. Let me couple this with a few examples to make lives easier. When we first did an agri challenge, to look at the best innovations, the best frugal innovations in the ecosystem, there was an entrepreneur from a tier 2 city of Rajasthan. What he did was he had his own farms. His father had his own farms, but there was no water on that farm. And to solve that water problem, his father had to travel miles and miles to get water for his farmland. What he did was he picked up all the orange peels that he found on the street and he converted into a polymer that could absorb water. Now, when he put that polymer back into the land, it would spread water into it, and then that helped him spend more time with his father. There are numerous such innovations that are existing in the Indian market at present, but what we really need at the present hour is to fuel these agri innovations through financing and through support. If I have to add this, give a little number perspective to this, we've seen that there are over 3,000 startups in India which are currently in the agri and food sector, and most of them have mostly registered in the past few years. A majority of these startups have been directly working with farmers in areas such as, marketplaces, agri-financing, livestock management, farm management, and analytics. It is very, very humbling to see right now the farmers using smart apps to check the quality of food, to check the best price that they can get for their feed, and to just learn about the best practices about this ecosystem. What has really fueled the farmer to use all these innovations which the startups and innovators today are doing is definitely the rural smart food penetration, which is the digital backbone to scale both business to farmer and business to business farmer models. There was also very interestingly a study conducted by ThinkAg, which reveals that only 30% of the farmers have access to finance from formal sources, thereby strengthening the need for the topic of discussion today, that there is a huge gap that needs to be filled for the agri fintech startups, and I hope that the conversation that follow will add and share more light to this. Um, Particularly, the agri-fintech startups have also a crucial role to play in solving for farmer financing, from origination to assessment, monitoring, and recovery. Digitization, access to alternate data, and transactions in the agri supply chain will improve the integration of these financial solutions. I also wanted to throw some light for all the entrepreneurs who are joining us today to think of certain areas where they could probably come up with solutions for the sector at present. The first one being risk mitigation and assessment. We all know that agri is a different sector, and unlike other sectors, we need to come up with new tools for risk mitigation and assessment, and thereby providing smart, intelligent tools to read the agri data and helps farmers predict better with their yields. The second solution, which the entrepreneurs and startups could think about, is digital crowdfunding, especially for this sector. I know there are a lot of individual campaigns going around crowdfunding, but to scale it up for a sector would be definitely helpful for everyone in this value chain. The third, as I mentioned, was around the ongoing payment programs, which are for medium to large scale farms. Using fintech to make the switch to ongoing payment programs will allow farmers to avoid some of the most common problems associated with traditional lending, so that they can better organize their finances and maximize their profits. Fourth, how do you make these solutions affordable to them? While we have seen that there are startups, there is microfinancing available, but we do not want to increase the rates so much, and we have to come up with affordable financial services uh, for this sector. And fifth, and of course the most important, is better insurance. Adequate crop insurance will, used to be a farm pipe's dream, but thanks to fintech, it is becoming a reality, and a lot of improvement has been made to provide access to this valuable financial resource. In the end, I would just like to say that the agri fintech sector is still its in infancy stage, but it is already reshaping the world. As these thoroughly modern technologies are incorporated into the field of agriculture, sustainability and profitability should both increase, making it easier to feed the world's growing population while providing an equitable livelihood for the farmers that make it possible for us. Thank you everyone for having me. Over to Nidhi and Agrim.
Thank you, Ms. Asta, for your enlightening and very positive views on the road that lies ahead for agri-fintechs in India and globally. I think your and Ms. Roberta's remarks have perfectly set the stage for the ensuing panel discussion, for which we have some very illustrious guests with us. It is my pleasure to introduce the esteemed panelists from Brazil. We have with us firstly Mr. Kleber Oliveira Soares, who is Director of Innovation at the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Food Supply. Before that, he was working as the Executive Director of Innovation and Technology at Embrapa, which is the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation. He has completed his PhD from veterinary medicine at the Federal Rural University of Rio de Janeiro, and has been working in the management of science, technology, and innovation for agribusiness for the past 15 years. He's a member for several national and international boards, committees, and fora, such as Global Network for Research and Innovation in Animal Health, PS Superior Agribusiness Council, among others. We are also delighted to have on board Dr. Izaki Ebehard. He's the CEO and co-founder of Agrio, a global agricultural risk intelligence provider platform. Mr. Izaki is a farmer, agricultural technician, and agronomist engineer with more than 35 peer-reviewed papers in academic history. As an expert in agribusiness, data science, and agri-finance, he has more than 17 years of experience in the space for banks, insurance companies, international institutions like UNDP, and government agencies like Brazilian Environment Ministry, Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Food Supply, institutions like National Institute for Space Research and the Brazilian Institute for Applied Economic Research. As Agrio is currently exploring the Indian market, I think this webinar is being held at a very opportune time, because we know that there is certainly interest on the Brazilian and Indian agri-fintech to companies to explore each other's markets. And so I think this panel discussion will add much more to that interest, and if not, it will ignite those interests. I would now request Grim to introduce the Indian panelists as well.
Thanks, Nidhi. Thanks, Klebe and Isaki, for your participation in this exchange of ideas, opinions, and thoughts. I'm absolutely delighted and, of course, honored to be joined with the panel here. We also have Mr. Arjun Aluwalia and Mr. Gils John from joining us from India. Mr. Arjun is the founder and CEO of Jai Kisan. Being a graduate of Texas A&M University, one of the largest agri-universities in the world, he brings with him a diverse experience across structuring operations and investing across different geographies. We also have Mr. John, who's a vice president at NAB Ventures Limited. NAB Ventures is a subsidiary of NABARD. Mr. John comes with 15 years of experience in early stage investments. He has had prior stints at Sidbi Venture Capital Limited, National Skill Development Corporation, NSDC, and he also holds a postgraduate degree in management from Mumbai University. Great that we have you here to listen to what I hope will transpire into a very interesting discussion about the challenges and also the underlying opportunities in the agri world today. Over to you, Nidhi.
Thank you, Agrim. Before we start the panel discussion, I would like to inform the audience that you can put your questions in the comment sections of whatever platform you're viewing this on. We'll be picking up the questions during the webinar, addressing it sometime at the end of the webinar. Now, let's really get into the panel discussion. So I think firstly, I would like to say that the NBC organized India Brazil Agritech cross incubation program last year, which involved the exchange of Indian and Brazilian agritech startups. So during the first phase, when the 5 Brazilian startups came to India, they realized that despite the many similarities that we assume, or even there which exist in the Indian and Brazilian agricultural ecosystems, there are still significant differences that can be observed, especially when we talk about it in the economic sense. So my question would be to Mr. Klebe and Mr. Arjun, if you can sort of uh, 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 give us an overview of the agricultural economy of both the countries, and which and the digital and traditional financial streams that are available therein for the farmers. Mr. Kleber, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Nid. First of all, I'd like to say good morning for the Brazilian guys and everyone, and good evening for to the everyone in India. For me, it's a pleasure to stay with these select panelists here and talking about India Brazil Fintech in this India Brazil Fintech webinar. Okay, talk a little bit about the Brazilian agribusiness. In Brazil, the agribusiness is very important for us and very important for the Brazilian economy. For your idea, the agribusiness in Brazil represents about an average 30% of the GDP, the total GDP of Brazil, and about 25% of the total of the employees. In Brazil, you have about more than 5.5 millions of farmers or farmlands in Brazil, and it's about 80% of that is the small farm. You see, and about the digital technology that nowadays is used in the agriculture area in Brazil, or even in livestock or forest system. In the last survey that was made in the beginning of this year, we saw that approximately 94% of the Brazilian farm use cell phone, and from these, about 6-8% are smartphone. This number is very important to say that nowadays the digital in Brazil is increased very fast. It's increased very fast. And of course, that's one of the big challenges that probably we will talk in this webinar is the financial support for the Brazilian farm, especially to small farm. It's for this first part, I'd like to stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Klebe. It is delighting to know that 94% of farmers use cell phones.
Yeah.
Mr. Arjun, would you like to shed some light on the Indian perspective on this?
Sure. Thank you, Nidhi. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Really excited to be here and looking forward to this engaging conversation going forward as well. So to set the stage, right, India is slightly different or vastly different from Brazil when it comes to agriculture, right? We are a significantly more smallholder farmer base here. So just to give you some kind of perspective, right, around the numbers that a country like India fundamentally carries, right? About 880 million people live in rural India. of which 7 out of 10 derive their primary source of livelihood from agri and allied sectors. As Agrim mentioned as well, 16% of the contribution to India's GDP comes from agriculture. But interestingly enough, over 42% of India's workforce is actually employed in the agri sector. And that is where it shows you the significant disparity between the number of people that agriculture fundamentally employs, but the value that we are generating out of that fundamental workforce. Reasons for these are multiple, starting with 85% of our farmers, more than 85% of our farmers are small or marginal landholder farmers, which means that they have less than 2 acres of land holding. 40% of Indian farms approximately are mechanized, and that does not mean that they have the full stack of mechanization. That actually just means that they may have a motor pump set or a very basic drip irrigation system on their farm. Now, average smartphone penetration across the country, if you include rural India, is somewhere between 25 and 33%. With rural India obviously having a significantly lesser penetration as well, which is active, right? To say that how many people have cell phones, how many people have data connections and things like that is one thing. The point is how many people are actually being active on that particular platform is when you can actually deliver financial services or whatever service you're planning to through that particular delivery module. Less than 5% of rural Indians have easy access to a bank branch. Less than 3.5% of rural Indians have access to insurance products. And as Asa mentioned as well, as ThinkAg study kind of revealed, only 30% of Indian farmers have access to formal financing. So we look at it slightly more conservatively, where we say over 50% of Indian farmers do not have access to formal financing fundamentally, right? And because of how unorganized and non-digitized this overall industry and ecosystem is, getting data around it is also a significant challenge. So what, the focus here is, and something we did extremely well in India with respect to urban India, was being able to develop those pipes, right, into the system to pull out the data from the customer. For example, UPI, right? We did UIDAI with Aadhaar, giving every individual in the country an identity using which we can start building a data or digital footprint around them. But for that, they would fundamentally have to use devices or some sort of technology for that data to relay fundamentally from the customer or from the user to the provider of whatever service that may be. So Nidhi, on that note, I'll take a pause here and happy to kind of be, jump into more depth as we go forward during your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klebe and Mr. Arjun. One thing that's eminent here is, after hearing to both of you, agriculture is the dominant sector of our economies, and credit further plays a crucial role in establishment of sustainable and profitable farming systems. It also increases the agricultural production. With this said, I would like to bring in Dr. Izaki here. Dr. Izaki running Agrio, which has got operations both in India and Brazil. What differences have you observed in agri-financing landscape of both the countries and also the similarities?
Thank you, Agrin, for the introduction, for the opportunity to talk. And I would get some of the insights which Arjun bring to the discussion. We have been, as a risk intelligence company, so trying to help the locals to where we work to develop, to improve, to deliver better services for farmers, digitizing all the process of acquisition, control, monitoring. We have been engaging with partners already to deploy services in India. So today we are working with mobile partners and core banking service. So we are able now to provide once we have let's say a cooperative or a small bank or a rural bank, to deliver a digital infrastructure to help them to improve their operations. So that said, we have been understanding what's going on in terms of exactly what Arjun mentioned. So it's a very different ecosystem in terms of distribution of lands, weather. It's very different from depending on regions. So you have more regions with some deficits in water. So we have been discussing with in north region of India. It's more or less, let's compare, not exactly, but let's say the situation in Brazil, you have northeast regions which are more has some restrictions, and in the south you have different conditions. So it's basically you need to address this type of all the traditional agricultural points, which like what is the weather impacting, what is the type of distribution, what type of crops people are doing. So, and that means you need to have a very open view for a external player to have to bring people from how we say locals to really bring knowledge about what's going on there, what's the history of the region, and then you, on top of that, with the technology existing today, you can build solutions. We have been already our partners in the mobile infrastructure, the payments and so on. They have been deploying with 5 banks already, so it's now starting to move there, and we have been having tremendous good relationship and seeing the requests. So this is why it's so great the opportunity to talk today and see if we can expand that this relationship, and we have lots of lessons for our Brazilian operations too. So how to deploy, since we are digitizing our payments infrastructure like India has today here in Brazil. So we can learn for our challenges with the small farmers here, how to improve. So have been last couple of months have been amazing despite of all COVID challenges. So I would like to stop by here and listen to some of our colleague panelists.
So, Dr. Izaki, this leads me to the second part of this question, part B. And I know you have touched upon it briefly, but if you could also expand on how you have tailored your company's solutions, Agrio's solutions, to the specific challenges of each economy.
Yeah. So what we design in terms of to help the providers to develop better services is a way to solve one of the major challenges in the agriculture. So for people who don't have credit score, risk assessment, don't have relationship with the bank, like Arjun said, like Kleber said, first step is the banks, the cooperatives, the local providers, or the insurance companies. They need to know who we are. So who are the farmers? What they are doing? What's the capacity? Where is the land? So this type seems kind of basic, but it's fundamental. So if we don't break this miss of the information about the personal and the production level, we don't solve this mismatch between what is possible and what farmers really are achieving. So in this sense, we have been building the capabilities to evaluate the crop fields, to do the last 20 years analysis, to help the insurance company, for example, to know what's the probability of this place to have a bad year, let's say. What is the probability of this crop get the expected yield, not only the projected, but what is the most probable. So there are different ways you can address that, and every time in our experience, despite being a few months and years working around or as a company, before that working for other companies like insurance companies and banks, but it's much more clear for the banks, for institutions to understand when they know what's going on, they can price the risk. And this makes lots of difference, because the farmers will not receive a no from the first place. They can receive a yes at this amount, at this level. So if we work on this sense of make more transparent the process and make the institutions, independent of the size and the position on the chain, know about the farmers, they will not it will be much easier to get a yes than is today for the farmers. And this makes a lot of change. I don't know, I would like to listen for our colleagues during the further conversation, what they think too about that.
Thank you, Mr. Zaki, for your views. I think one very interesting point has been that you're learning both from India and Brazil and applying it in the other ecosystem. That is very encouraging, and I think that's one of the benefits of internationalizing your business. Now, I would like to bring in Mr. Gilles John from NAB Ventures into this discussion. Mr. John, we've heard about Agrio's business model, but I would like to know from you what are the current agri-fintech models that are prevalent in India that to suffice the ever increasing need for sustainable credit for farmers?
So good morning to everyone in India. Glad to be a part of the discussion. So Agrifintech as such is a very early stage business in India. I think Arjun has and Jai Kisan have been clearly pioneers in doing that. Agri credit through fintech has been relevant in India in various forms. Like traditionally, it has been to branch-led banking, physical banking. There has been a layer of microfinance institutions which have provided credit for agriculture or allied activities, but these both come with their own inherent challenges. Banks come with their limitation of having a physical branch-led model, wherein there is a limit to the number of people that you can reach out to and a limit to the scale that you can give finance to. And that also leads to a lot of information asymmetry, as the panelists have mentioned. The bankers don't know what farmers are doing. The farmers also don't know what sort of stuff to be done and what is the right way and the right approach to go about things so that every stakeholder in the value chain is adequately compensated for their effort. What Arjun and Jai Kisan have been pioneers in doing is that using technology to remove that information asymmetry and remove access to finance in a very cost-effective manner. Traditional microfinance typically lend at 25, anything north of 20% to 30%, which does not make the whole produce remunerative to the value chain actor. Banks typically lend at a less rate, which is primarily driven by Government of India norm, but that also comes with a limitation of risk. Jai Kisan has been able to democratize access to finance and also reduce the risk very significantly. And I must say that they are one of the best, best loan performing rates in the country. And as such, there's not too much of a fintech play, agri-fintech play in India. I can probably say 5-6 names which are actually using finance, like using their platform to actually lend. There are P2P models, but they come with limitations of scale and also limitations of the people that you can reach out to. The most effective way to reach out to use bank finance, because banks can typically lend at scale a large amount and use technology as a layer to democratize the assets. That's what Arjun has been able to do. And I think that's the reason you are able to see a lot of agri-fintech interest in agri-fintech in India. The numbers have been told by various panelists, but even having said that, it's interesting to note from NABARD angle that significantly from 1980s till now, the share of long-term credit to agriculture has fallen from as high as 50% to something as low as 22%, which tells us two interesting things. One, farmer is moving from sustenance farming to having a more commercial mindset. There are a lot of numbers about small and marginal farmers. I would like to throw some interesting numbers here. There are around 2 crore farmers in India who have a commercial orientation by virtue of having land in excess of 2 hectares. So 2 crore is a huge market. 2 crore number of farmers is a huge market, and also India having only 17% of the land being used for commercial crop production, that is not cereals or grains. The commercial crop production, horticultural crop production is consistently beaten traditional food grain production for the last 8 years now, which tells two interesting things. Farmers are moving towards more commercial mode of cultivation, and when you are moving towards more commercial mode of cultivation, you increase to access to finance and risk management becomes very critical. But India also suffers from a lot of own challenges, like having other infrastructure challenges. So using tech to manage your risk and democratize access to finance in a very cost-effective manner. Here, the rate is not the challenge. India has a market for 25% lenders, 25% interest cost. India has a market for 6% interest cost. What really matters is to lend it to the guy when he needs it at a cost which works for him. So that is what Jai Kisan has been pioneering doing, and we are very proud to be associated with them.
Thank you, Mr. John, for providing such a detailed overview of the agri-fintech models currently present in India and also vocalizing how Jai Kisan has been successfully able to do it. Agri-fintech startups in both the countries have successfully identified the pressure points that exist in making credit more available and more accessible. But to boost and catalyze the initiatives, forward policy and regulatory support is equally important. So turning to Klebe to put light on this, Klebe, could you give us an overview of regulatory and policy framework that applies on agri-fintechs in Brazil, please? Also, we would really like to know about the department's work in promoting agri-fintechs.
Okay, Agri. Our rule from the Ministry of Agriculture is try to promoting a new space for the startup in the agrifintech and the agritechs in Brazil. Our plan is based on technology tools and innovation to support the development of the agricultural and livestock and forest chain in Brazil. Nowadays, we are focused on trying to develop five pillars or five big drivers. For us, it's very important to establish this milestone to develop the agricultural and livestock and forest chain in Brazil. And we are focused in five drivers that is related to with the first one is with sustainability. Yeah, for us, sustainability is very important. And from sustainability, we are looking to develop new issues. It's like climate, weather, and try to support to develop new tools and innovation looking for footprint from carbon, from using water, and the same way try to develop new brand. The second drive that are developing is bioeconomy. Why bioeconomy? For Brazil, bioeconomy is very important. Even to work on some advanced biological tools, is like gene editing, nanotechnology, proteomic, and other issues. In the same way, we are developing a new program based on bio inputs. We think that the next generation of agriculture, especially to cultivate vegetable in the tropical in Brazil, we will be very supported by bio inputs. In the same way, in bioeconomy, we are looking to develop new tools and new kind of innovation to bioenergy, natural resource, genetic resource, and of course, try to diversification the products in the farmlands. The third pillar, the third drive that we work very hard is digital. For us in Brazil, the agriculture based on digital it will be very, very strong in the next years. When you talk about digital, we need to look for different kind of issues. From virtual learning, pass to blockchain, we need to use a lot blockchain approach in agriculture in Brazil. In the same way, we need to increase our connectivity to support our farmers. In the same way, to develop new devices and use AI, farm precision, Presto digital twins, and of course, we try to reduce the time to introduce holotech in agriculture. The fourth drive that I'd like to to talk shortly is about food tech. Yeah. In the same way, food tech is a very important drive that we need to look in Brazil, because we need to add value for the, especially for the food that was produced by the Brazilian farms. And then when you talk about food tech, we are talking about new ingredients, new process. We are talking about a plant-based technology, plant-based product. In the same way, cell-based. press to precision fermentation and vertical farming, and of course we need to improve cooling and freezing technology. And the last one for us, another very important driver is open innovation. Yes, for us from MAPA, from Ministry of Agriculture in Brazil, when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about not only fintech or startups or agrifintech. For us, the open innovation is a very huge step to the Brazilian agriculture increase fast. Why? Because we need to develop a new innovation ecosystem, even to connect startups and agritechs and agrifintechs with governmental institutions and private institutions and banks and fundings and international funds, international companies like Brazilian or Indian companies and Indian private or governmental companies. In the same way, we need to look to develop some issues like social innovation. When I talk about social innovation, I talk to improve, to increase the innovation, especially for small farm. Okay, in the same way, we look to develop the alliance and nets to connect the farming and to improve together. And of course, nowadays, when you talk to open innovation, we need to see the situation that pandemic caused by COVID-19 is causing in every place. You see. And then it's very important to develop new kind of cultivate, new kind of form to close and to approximate the farmer to the customers. And then for us, it's very important to develop new issues like short chain. Yeah, why short chain? Because our people like us that consume different products from agriculture need to get and add value and a special perceptual value to the products that we consume. And then for us nowadays it's very, very important to develop short chain and to connect farm to consumers.
Thank you, Mr. Klebe. I'm really pleased to learn about the great work that is being done by the government of Brazil and yourself, and also sharing the multiple directions, the strategic directions that have been taking place in the thought process in laying out the strategy for the entire work streams. Taking this discussion to a more macro note, my next question is for Dr. Izakir. Dr. Izakir, what would be the most important aspects for feeding almost 10 billion people in decades to come while also ensuring the financial stability of farmers?
Yeah, so this is maybe the one of the species challenges we have as humans on Earth to solve. So we have just a frame for the good people who maybe listen our discussion. It's not 100% aware. So we have a limit of lands to use, and at the same time we cannot improve further, do harm to our environmental assets. So at some point we need to protect our water and all the other assets which the farmers are really close to. But nevertheless, we need to increase in 70%, almost double our production over the next 3 decades, 2-3 decades. So this imposes exactly the thematic of our discussion here. So the only way we will be able to cover the gap on the food demand without improve or further destroy our ecosystems globally, it's not only a challenge for India and Brazil, is developing better our production with our small farmers, because they are the people who have space to further develop, to increase yields, to do better stable production, to have means to deploy products close to the regions where the big cities are. So in our perception as a company, as people who have been working on the space, or we solve that, and then specifically for India and Brazil, or we solve as countries which have lots of farmers to improve their lives and their production and their conditions to act in this space, or we will face challenges and mass migrations and problems in multiple stages of the society. So at some level, rely on our good entrepreneurs around the Agrifintech and ag space itself to help this, and I guess this perception for Arjun too. So we, if those which we know, the farmers who must have been suffering for gaps in finance, gaps in the insurance, if we can help those, we will solve the problem in the production side. At the same time, we will keep these people living better, and nevertheless, we will not destroy further our environment. So I guess with mostly the possible choice and decision for our governments and all the regulation behind of that and so on. So I hope we can work well on that. And this is majorly why we start to build the Agrio, and we see lots of people doing the same all over the globe.
Thank you, Mr. Izaki, for highlighting the environmental role in agriculture for the decades to come. And I think a very interesting point you brought up was that you cannot really protect the consumers of food without questioning the producers of food, their livelihoods and their incomes. I think that's a very interesting point. Now I would like to bring in again Mr. Gills into the discussion. Mr. Gills, do you think, like you mentioned, the role of agri-fintechs in democratizing the access to credit in India and even globally? Do you think agri-fintechs can, in the long term, uh, sort of supplement the role of banks in meeting the short-term credit needs of farmers? And thereby relegating the banks to focus more on the long-term financing needs of agriculture, for example, for building infrastructure, pre-harvest and post-harvest. Obviously,
Yeah.
what are
So,
you?
as I mentioned earlier, there is an increasing stress on short-term financing in agriculture, and despite a network of banks, microfinance institutions, and other people, still 40% people lack access to formal financing in some form or the other, and 10% exclusively lack access to any sort of financing. So that somehow gives the idea that the traditional or conventional mode of access to financing is not worked in terms of reaching the last mile, which is where I feel that a fintech player could kind of supplement or even take over the roles of banks in providing access to short-term financing to people who require it at a rate which they require it. And banks can really focus on long-term lending, which is what their forte should be. For example, India, has only whatever number of cold storage India has. India requires that's only 10% of what India essentially needs, which essentially shows that banks are reluctant, or the business models are such that banks are, at this current point of time, are not willing to finance physical infrastructure. But if Agri-Fintech were to take over the role of being a provider for short-term, cost-effective credit, then banks would be probably freed up from their conventional lending cycle to kind of focus more on long-term infra creation, which will include anything right from irrigation pumps to dams to warehousing or cold storage facilities. Hello.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Gills, for sharing your views. Now, I would like to turn to Mr. Arjun. Mr. Gills mentioned, agri-fintechs are really needed to sort of plug the gaps in the credit needs and even, I think, insurance needs of farmers. So, how do you, as you deploy a B2B2C model, how do you lower the final cost for the farmers by collaborating with the traditional banking and financial institutions? What is how is your collaboration with them?
Sure. Thanks for that, Nidhi. So just to kind of lay the context here a little bit, right? What are the reasons why a bank doesn't go directly for, let's say, a rural customer or a farmer, fundamentally? Yeah. Number one, high acquisition costs, right? High acquisition cost fundamentally bakes in the two reasons which drive up to it. Number one, operationalizing a business unit to be able to go acquire this farmer in the middle of nowhere, right? But the reason why that even comes about, or why that's even a topic, is because there's no data available around that particular farmer, right? Like many people around the call has mentioned as well, we need to build a footprint around the farmer. We need to build an identity of the particular farmer so that the banker, in a clear, verified format, can understand what the farmer's operations look like currently, how will they change with the credit being provided, and how will the credit be repaid with that operational change fundamentally taking place going forward. Yeah. So when we come in with that fact of high, acquisition costs, right? It's a very high acquisition cost to even onboard a customer on Park Avenue in New York, right? So is it in Mayfair in London? Yeah, it's a very high acquisition cost to acquire them, but the banker is happy to do so because their lifetime value is very well defined for that particular banker, right? But today, the financial institution does not know as to what is the lifetime value around that particular customer that they will be able to extract if they do take on this challenge of these high operational costs. Yeah. So fundamentally, if we want to build a model which is able to provide a value proposition for all stakeholders, right? To begin with, and most importantly, the grower or the farmer, number one, right? Number two, the supplier of that capital, because otherwise they wouldn't supply it, right? And then number three, whoever is benefiting from that credit in addition to the farmer, right? We always have been talking about how a farmer should pay the interest rate for this capital, right? Interestingly, it's not a farmer taking the money and actually going and using it in their personal, reasons or their personal uses. They're going to take that money and go spend it somewhere, right? For either inputs, for either equipment, for either advisory services. Each of those platforms do significantly better when credit is formalized and the customer is able to get credit. Fundamentally, that value chain business will increase its top line and its bottom line because now the customer has an increased capacity to be able to consume whatever product or service they are fundamentally selling, right? So how do we build in a product where the value chain partner pays up a little bit, right? The farmer pays up a little bit, and hence the cost of capital for the farmer is decreased significantly. At the same time, you use that particular value chain partner, and in India, value chain partners like sellers or buyers from farmers are the most influential entities, not only in the agri landscape, but mostly in the rural landscape. Right? Why? Because they control such a large number of individuals and how they conduct and carry on business going forward. Right? So how do we leverage that particular entity who's been serving this farmer, this farmer's father, this farmer's father's father, into being able to help us acquire that particular customer in a cheap manner, but also help us assess the risk around that customer? Because they are the ones who know them the best over a course of multiple generations, right? And that is how you are able to decrease your operationalization or acquisition costs, because the merchant or the value chain player is doing most of the onboarding for you, all right? Number two is that you're able to decrease the cost of capital for the farmer because this value chain partner is also paying up for that particular cost of capital. Right? And the supplier is happy now because they're getting a higher return, number one, but also significantly more number of customers in a no-cost manner. They don't need to deploy any cost. Jai Kisan is doing all the work for them, right? And on the other hand, a secured portfolio, because they're not just underwriting the risk from the individual farmer. They're actually underwriting the risk also on the value chain player who's guaranteeing that fundamental risk. Right? So in that process, you reduce the acquisition cost, you secure the bit, you decrease the cost of capital for the farmer, but make sure that the return to the lender is a risk-adjusted return for what kind of risk they are fundamentally taking. right? And in that process, you're being able to actually provide a value proposition to each stakeholder, starting with the farmer, going up to the supplier, which is the lender, and then the value chain player, right? By helping them increase their sales or increasing their top line or bottom line in whatever fashion. Yeah. And doing all of this in a digital fashion, because we are only today acquiring the customer. We've not built their footprint yet, right? We've acquired the customer. We've started building the footprint, but we are taking this plunge into acquiring the customer through credit because it's guaranteed by some of the other value chain partner. And now going forward, we build their footprint and then give maybe their wife access to financing for her operations, right? Maybe insurance for their entire family. It can be crop insurance, it can be life insurance, it can be asset insurance, right? And then build that further because you already increase their capability to purchase, which increases their capability to produce, which increases their surplus, which there then needs to be protected by insurance products, savings products, and the like. So the goal cannot only be to enhance their livelihood, it also needs to be to protect their livelihood. And in that process, you also realize that you're building a sustainable and scalable fintech business because you're not just providing a risk product, which is credit, but you're actually also providing secured products like insurance, savings, and the like to be able to help build a sustainable business model ourselves to be able to get to more and more farmers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arjun. That was quite insightful and a detailed response. I'm very impressed by how well the strategy and the thought process has been laid out, covering the entire spectrum of things which is required, which a farmer looks towards. So we hope to see a lot more happening in this direction, in this space. My next question is for Mr. Klebe again, and I asked this to develop a deeper understanding of the constraints that exist in Brazil's agriculture ecosystem. So, Mr. Klebe, what are the challenges and financing bottlenecks in Brazilian agriculture that agrifintechs, both Brazilian and Indian, need to focus on?
Oh yes, we have some big challenge to continue to increase the agriculture in Brazil. But for me, one of the biggest one is exactly issues related with finance and credit, and then. I suggest that Agrifintech have a very, very big opportunity in Brazil because the fintech field in Brazil is quite totally open. You see, and for idea, we have in Brazil more than 3.7, 3.8 million of farms that need credit, especially small farm in Brazil. Then I think that Agrifintech, Indian Agrifintech, have a great opportunity here. Why? Because in your country you have a quite great experience to support financial, to support credit to small farm, and of course, India companies in India Agrifintech have a good experience, yeah, and to provide credit to small farm. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Klebe, for highlighting the challenges and consequently the subscope that exists for Indian agrifintechs to collaborate with the Brazilian agrifintechs in the Brazilian market. And hopefully, we really hope we see that soon. We see that happening soon. And now I would like to address the elephant in the room, which is financial inclusion in the agricultural landscape. We have had, I think, financial inclusion has been a theme we have been discussing in every one of our fintech webinars, and it's such an important theme, especially in the rural sector. But what often is not discussed, although in this webinar, Agrio and Jackie-san have touched upon it, that how do you reduce the risk for the provider of the capital, which in turn will reduce the cost for the end consumer. As a venture capital fund, Mr. Gilson, I would like to know from you what technologies do you look for, or are you looking for in agri fintechs that can effectively reduce their risks and thereby accelerate the financial inclusion pace in the country and the world globally?
So, so it's like what Arjun mentioned. Each of the actor in the value chain will have to bear the cost of capital for the cost of credit to effectively reduce from the rate that it is right now. Today, the cost of credit is primarily high because there is a significant cost in acquiring the customer, requires a significant cost in monitoring the lending activity, and significant cost in recovery. So Jai Kisan or any other fintech player, if you look at even fintech players outside of agri, you look at urban areas, what a player like Bajaj Finance has done. It has actually asked the manufacturer to kind of take the burden of interest cost and as a consequence reduce the cost of customer acquisition, also enable a larger number of customers who are sitting on the fence. Yeah, I will buy a mobile phone or TV when I have cash to actually taking the decision because I will buy it on credit. And this effect can be seen. There will be tremendous growth in penetration of mobile phone. Information asymmetry has reduced. As a consequence, fintech boom has pretty much been, prior to agri fintech boom being seen now, has been seen for the last 4 or 5 years in urban or semi-urban India. We expect the same scenario to pan out in rural India or agriculture, sector as well. So any technology primarily which uses the which enables customer acquisition at scale. So, for example, you could have satellite data, you could have customer acquisition system. A lot of infrastructure has also been created by government by way of Aadhaar stack, India stack, payment gateway, and everything, which has enabled a player, any agri fintech player, to build a tech layer on top of it and reduce even their cost of customer acquisition. So in terms of technologies, what we are essentially looking for is a player who can acquire and service a loan at scale, which I think Jai Kisan has been, very prudently doing. I mean, which is why, this a testament to the fact that, they have been able to scale up pretty fast. So that's where there are emerging technologies like blockchain, satellite data and all, but that is primarily with a view to ensure the quality of the produce and such. I mean, from the point of view of enabling access to credit, I think there are enough technologies in place. It's just a question of getting the blocks together and removing the information asymmetry. So it's more a question of business model innovation and less a question of technology evolution. I mean, those pipes are already there in place. I mean, it's just what Arjun had done is innovated on the business model. What Bajaj had done for urban India, I am proud to say that Jai Kisan is doing for rural India. I mean, obviously his business model is slightly tweaked to that extent, but that is what essentially he has done. So in terms of technology, I don't think we are looking for something really breakthrough in that. What essentially funds like us would look for is a business model innovation and less of a technology innovation.
Thank you, Mr. John. I think all of us agree here that technology and financial technology is a boon for agriculture and agriculturists. And it's just on us to let it continue to be a boon. But how can we do that better? How can we do it in a much more efficient and optimal manner? One thought which I have is by joining hands, by partnerships. And I'd like to bring in Dr. Izaki here. Dr. Izaki, how do you envisage potential partnerships between Brazilian and Indian companies in the agri-tech, specifically the agri-fintech space?
Yeah, thank you, Agri. For us, have been anxiety time when we were waiting for opportunity to engage with the first conversations at the space with Indian counterpartners. And at the point now we have the ability to deploy not only what we do as a more intelligence layer behind the people who operate, but to help to deliver the infrastructure to do the operations itself. So we build that part, and now we are already engaging on the space. So what we envision, what we see in the future is like building models, like sharing the potential work together. So once we have, let's say, cooperatives, local communities, or even some agencies or people from government, or maybe the supply chain suppliers of the local suppliers of inputs, or who want to be participating in the Agrifintech space, where we can help in the technology side and bring some other technology parts from partners from the Indian ecosystem, and start to build that, and same time bring that to the South America, to Brazil market. Once we adjust, we have this model where we can deploy. For example, Kleber mentioned about the challenge. We have a couple of million of families here, and it's more or less like a potential more than $100 billion in revenue for the economy if we leverage those people to the market. So once we have mobile digital payments rails like India has, the Brazilian Central Bank just released. So the infrastructure is more or less similar. So once you have this model, you can bring that here, you can develop there. So maybe we can build some joint ventures on the space. In fact, it's something like that we are looking for. So to have real partners, we can work side by side and develop this opportunities. There are millions of families in Latin America, and there are millions of families in India to be in Southeast Asia, in fact, too. So, and India can be a hub for that. So in our perception, if we keep building on this space in the Asia ecosystem, who is partnering with us in India will be probably the platform for operations outside in the Southeast, in the Asia ecosystem itself. So there are huge things on the table to be built in the next 5 to 10 years. And I hope we can, from this conversation, for the further connections we had, we keep building that and go forward. So the people are waiting for us. We need to help to solve these problems.
Thank you, Mr. Zaki, for bringing forth the plethora of opportunities that are on the horizon for potential partnerships between India and Brazil. And I know that you mentioned the next 5 to 10 years, but I really want to see them materialize in the very near future. Right. So now, moving on to, in a similar vein, I would like to ask Mr. Arjun, what roadblocks Jai Kisan has faced till now and overcome, and what challenges do you think still remain where domestic and foreign and hopefully Brazilian agrifintechs can come in and plug the gaps?
Sure. So I think one major flaw that we young companies have, right, which are tech driven, is that we think competition is important, right? But one thing I got very clearly after moving back and setting up Jai Kisan is that collaboration over competition any day. Yeah. And especially when you're catering to a market which has more than 880 million people. Yeah. And just in one geography, right? And as Zaki, you very clearly mentioned, right? Very transferable to Southeast Asia. I've lived in Mexico too, very transferable to Mexico and other countries in Latin America, and especially Brazil, with that kind of taking a significant chunk of the agri economy there as well. So I think that is one realization that entrepreneurs need to kind of step in with, is that collaborate from day number one, rather than, kind of constantly protecting your territory and thinking that you're going to achieve greatness, right, while doing that. That's number one. Number two is that, as aggressive tech companies, we go after very audacious goals, right? And one of them is, as a function of tech, is direct to consumer, direct to customer, right? Doesn't work in rural India, right? I don't know Brazil that well, but largely Southeast Asia is something we've learned. My co-founder is Southeast Asian. He's originally Filipino of American citizenship. So the plan here is to kind of scale out to various Southeast Asian countries as well. And we started kind of learning them slowly and steadily. But we do see a similarity there as well, right? That D2C is far off today, right? And D2C will be far off till the time those kind of infrastructure networks are set up where every farmer has a smartphone in their hand and is actually using it for more than WhatsApp, right? And how do you get them to do that? By being able to push information through people who they fundamentally have trusted over generations, right? And they definitely do not trust a person wearing a shirt and a pant living in an urban center, right? Let's make that very clear also. So who do they trust? Is someone who they see on a daily basis, who they buy from or sell to on a daily basis, irrespective whether that person is actually giving them the right information, right, in a symmetrical manner or not. It doesn't really matter because that bonding is very tight and it's coming from generations, right? So rather than going and taking on this task of saying, we will move the middleman out, we will go direct to customer, we will get so much value to the farmer and things like that, what ends up happening is that no value is created in the process, right? So how do we leverage this influential middleman while making sure that the farmer gets what they're supposed to in a very cost-effective manner, right? And this middleman can also make their business more streamlined with technology, right? Because it's not that this middleman is exploiting technically, right? It is their business is so unorganized themselves that they end up exploiting without knowing it, right? And that is, I think, some stuff that we've learned at an early stage, we've been able to build for, solve for here internally, right? And hence, we understand and respect this particular middleman or the value chain partner to be able to keep them as a key stakeholder in whatever financial product or technological product we build to get it to the farmer eventually.
Thank you, Arjun. I think you've raised really, personally for me, it was a really enlightening point because all the textbooks that have vilified middlemen till now, I think that's something you've shattered. So I'm really, it has been enlightening. And since you mentioned that you want collaborate from day one, I think in a similar vein, there has been one audience question. With the work that Jai-Kisan is doing, do you plan to expand to Brazil and globally in the coming time? I know you touched upon expanding to South East Asia in the near future, but what are your plans in Brazil and other parts of the world?
Sure. Personally, and my co-founder, we love Latin America. We spent a significant amount of time there as well. Definitely a different market, right? Different scale, different size, and different type of farmers altogether. Okay. So initially, we do have Southeast Asia very clearly laid out as to one of the expanding points, right? As things progress, we would be happy to explore, and I'd love to kind of catch up offline as well to kind of understand what you guys are working on, walk you through what we are, right? And start working on that collaboration bit going forward, and at least start with information exchange, right? So as Gil's mentioned, a large part is business model innovation, right? Which fundamentally comes in with being able to exchange information as much as possible in the most transparent manner to be able to make our own businesses effective in our own geographies, right? And then as you mentioned, maybe there's no need to fundamentally scale out. There are models that one can, or other companies also, right? Just not yours and ours. Fundamentally, there are so many other platforms that are and will continue to work on this problem because it's a big problem, and we will need multiple players to do so. To be able to exchange information and leverage it and help each other to come up with more partnership-led efforts, right? Rather than us scaling out there, you scaling out here, and things like that, and we doing it more in a joint kind of an effort as well. But obviously, that kind of depends on the information exchange that can take place prior to. So we look forward to that, Isaki. Looking forward to connecting with you offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. I think today's topic cannot be more timely given the global agricultural realities. And of course, as you mentioned, we'd be, as Invest India, we'd be happy to facilitate your connect to Dr. Izaki as well and Agrio, and look forward to working in that direction. On that optimistic note, we end today's panel discussion. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
I also thank all the panelists and the members of the audience for their valuable time. It has been a really fruitful and enlightening discussion for me, and I hope for the audience as well. And we have seen the scope for partnerships that exist between our two countries, and I hope to see the collaborations materializing very soon. I think Brazilian, like many Brazilian Agrifintechs will be willing to come and explore Indian market, and maybe potential collaborations can help in achieving India's stated goal of doubling farmers' income by 2022. So I think you can count on the embassies and Invest India's support on collaborating further, and we really look forward to it. On one another note, I would like to go ahead and invite you for India Brazil startup bridge launch, which is going to happen tomorrow. Please join in at the same time, 5:30 p.m. on Startup India's YouTube channel and our embassy's Facebook channel. And we'll soon come up with the next fintech webinar, and we will really hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Nidhi. For audience, sorry, Mr. John, you were saying.
I said stay healthy and safe. I mean, that's the line we use nowadays.
I didn't get. I'm sorry.
I said stay healthy and safe. I mean, that's the line we use nowadays.
Absolutely. Agree.
Okay.
Agree. So for audience who have any additional questions or would like to connect with us, please do so using our website, investindia.gov.in. You can also reach out to us at Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook handles, and so goes for the Embassy of Brazil in New Delhi, India as well. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day ahead. Goodbye. Thanks.